So it's the tennis at the minute. So Richard's really into his tennis. So Richard, we don't want to hear about it. All right, good. Okay, is it working? Right. Zoom. Done. Right. Okay. Right. On par, Richard. That's my only tennis for today. So, any news from you, Pat, other than you're eating an ice cream and we all want to know what flavor it is? Mint.
Yes. Well, I found an article, but I forgot to bring it up.
You
So,
did that last week.
so what I'll do is I'll bring it up after we have our break and show it to you because I can't remember what it's about, but I cut it out. So there we are.
Oh well. Oh, and you cut it out. Well, you can't do any more than that, can you? Really? Right, Richard. Anything you want to say, darling?
No, nothing for me.
Right. Oh, and the editing stuff on the book seems to be working now. I'm getting your annoying corrections and I'm sorting them out.
All right. That's something then.
The problem is when I come in across your corrections, they've already AI has already put them into the text, right? So I'm thinking, well, why have I got to put a space between this and why I've got to do that? And it's like it's already been done. So, oh, and yeah, last night, right? I can't make this up. Last night, you know, this AI thing sort of taking over lots of things, right? Last night I was editing the book, and I thought, right, I've got to do this on this certain chapter, right? And I'm talking about doing this thing on a certain chapter. And the next minute, I pressed something on a computer, and it's at that chapter for me to edit it. The AI is actually listening to me on the computer, and it's taking me to that chapter in the book for what I need to edit it. Can you believe that? Mind you, it's not as bad as what happened to me. You know what happened to me a few months ago, didn't you? I was twiddling I was talking, right, and my phone had caught the fact that I was thinking about changing the direct debit to somebody, right, and eventually I didn't want to change it. So then I went on my direct debits, and this person had more money in their direct debit because my AI took it that they wanted me to increase my direct debit on my bank account, which wasn't even open on my, but it was. So you've got to be very careful with your phones these days, folks. Anyway, Goth.
No archaeological news. Very quiet.
Very, very quiet. I tell you, somebody who's not going to be quiet, Goth, is going to be Anne. So, well, Anne, anything you want to tell us?
You are?
Anything you want to tell us, love?
Oh, I've had loads.
Well,
I've had loads on Facebook, but you know, I don't know where they're coming from. All of a sudden, there's archaeology news.
Well, go on, give us something then.
Oh God. Well, the one thing I was going to tell you last week was that they found a Bronze Age, not settlement, but remains in a playground in Cardiff.
Oh, we did Trelloy Park last week.
Did that? Did you?
Yeah, we did.
Oh heck, I'll have to find out what I've got. I shared it. You should be able to tell me.
Oh, hang on,
Richard, you can tell me.
Yeah, we did do that last week.
It's on Bridgend Archaeology Cymru, but I don't know if I'm supposed to do that.
Yeah, we did. It was fine.
Oh, that's all right then. There's quite a few, all about the Basque country, you know, the language. The language is anthropology because it's very, very old.
Yeah.
And it goes back to now Iron Age, if not before. And it's very strange language, I think. But what else was there?
I don't know. You're telling us.
Oh, all right then. Well, I'll maybe at the end of the program. All right.
Oh, that sounds really good at the end of the program. That's like a live TV program. I like that. We like that. Right. So what we are going to do tonight, I'm gonna give you a little bit of a list. My list is here, and we're going to look at the Phoenicians. We're going to look at the year 753 BC. We're going to look at what happened to Hannibal. Where did he go? We're going to look at a city in Italy that we've got evidence of a siege, that the Romans besieged a Carthaginian friendly city. We've got carving styles, the Ionic, Doric, and that type of stuff. And children placed in honey to preserve them.
Oh.
So, I might, you never know, I might start off with that bit. I'm not sure. Right. So what we'll do is we'll go onto the screen, and not as many images as last week, which I think was about 70, but we got a fair few, and we'll do that there. And did you guys see me on Channel 4 on Tuesday?
Did we what?
Hang on, I was on Channel 4 on Monday with that murder case. No, all right, no.
Oh, no.
Oh.
No. Oh, don't worry. I couldn't have been the suspect for the simple reason the guy was from Jamaica.
Mm.
Right.
Was it in Wales?
No, it was in Bristol,
Oh, right.
and it was on the Channel 4 news. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah.
So
I can't. Oh God.
there's me being eaten by zombies. So there we go.
Awful.
Right. Yeah, you got to see it again. Look at that.
Awful.
It's terrible, isn't it? Right. I would like to say, if you're interested, go and see the new film. 28 years later, it's great, but it's not really a zombie film. But that's for you to work that out. Right. So today we've got this really interesting people to analyze, and these are known as the Phoenicians. Now we've mentioned the Phoenicians a fair bit over the past few weeks, and tonight is no such exception. So what I wanted to do is put these people into a sense of context. Now, what I mean by that is that the Phoenicians themselves are the antithesis to the Carthaginians, and these are the people that allow us to understand what we're doing next week. And I did promise that we'll be doing ancient Greek and Roman historians and geographers. There are actually quite a lot of them, but we won't be looking in detail at every single one. But there's a couple of Tacituses, there's a couple of Plinies, there's even Julius Caesar, and Livy, and all these wonderful names I keep mentioning, right? So, but we just got to put these people into context if we're going to try and understand where we're going to be going, i.e., Roman era Britain. So this is along the Levant coastline. Modern Levant is the likes of the Gaza Strip, Lebanon, Beirut, Syria, going all the way down to sort of the top bit of Egypt, and sort of going all the way up to Turkey, right? So that's the Levant. And one of the great cities of these wonderful Phoenicians was in fact Sidon. And this little image, sort of stereotypical romantic image of these Phoenicians. But the Phoenicians themselves could be said to be the answer to what people were saying last week. we don't learn. It's all about war. And the Romans were going to beat the Carthaginians, and the Carthaginians wanted to beat the Romans, and then we go through war, and we see through pages and pages, even today, with the border dispute in Ukraine and the silly stuff that's going on in the Gaza. War doesn't seem to stop. However, what's going on with when we look at the Phoenicians? And we look about the Etruscans, who were sort of their contemporaries by about 500 years BC. Neither of these people went out conquering and defeating other nations. They traded and got on with things. A bit like some of those Central American civilizations, like the Zapotecs and the Olmecs, that they were people that wished to be more in touch with themselves rather than in touch with taking everything from everybody else. So when we think about the Phoenicians, this is how they push over into the Mediterranean from their homeland.
Right.
And the Phoenicians themselves, you could say, are the first great explorers, merchants, traders, colonizers in brackets. They're basically going out, creating new places where places hadn't existed before, such as Utica and Palermo in Sicily, and looking at the likes of the Balearics and Malaga, and then going to the likes of Marseille. Marseille, which is shown on the map there, was in fact a great Phoenician trading post. But these are not to be classed as great, huge, sprawling cities such as Rome or Carthage. When we think, and we've got a few images. When we think about Byblos, and we think about Sidon and Tyre, these are the home localities, and a place known as Beirut, which is modern day Beirut. So the name Phoenician is a designation, like we are UK citizens, but none of us would say that. We wouldn't go out saying, "Oh, I'm a UKian," right? You don't say that. A designation is we are people from the UK, right? These are people from the Phoenician towns and cities, right? It's a designation. We are part of the Phoenician culture, i.e., we are part of the UK culture, right? But we'd never call ourselves the UKians, and the Phoenicians probably, in many ways, didn't call themselves Phoenicians either. So they identify themselves as a common people with common ideas in places like Cyprus, places like Crete, places like Tangier, all the way across the Mediterranean. And they were known. The Egyptians loved them. They brought things to the Egyptians to trade. The Egyptians didn't feel threatened by them. The Phoenicians, if they gathered together, they could have conquered Egypt. They could have conquered the whole Mediterranean. They didn't choose to. They were traders. In many ways, the Phoenicians were a bit like a people that would come later. That those people that go Vikinging, those Vikings, which is a name that is also a designation, and where Vikings would go out settling and trading and creating commercial posts like Dublin, right? We've got to see them like that, and there is this thing that you're going off on warships, killing everybody all the time, but that's not really what they were doing. And when you compare them with the Vikings, you get this sort of sense of that the Vikings were never really nation builders, right? They may be the founders of the Tsars in Russia, but the Russians wouldn't call themselves Vikings. They may have been the founders of the people Normandy, for example, who would eventually come over to Britain. They might have been settlers in Greenland and Iceland. The biggest achievement of the Vikings would be Iceland, but and the biggest achievement of the Phoenicians would be, say, Carthage. And we've got a lot to think about when we think about the Phoenicians. they offer us one of the oldest forms of governance. Their cities were ruled over by their individual cities were ruled over by an elite family elite. So basically, your family can be the king one year, and do you want your family to be the king next year? Yeah, that'd be fine. So the people had an idea of some kind of weird pseudo democracy, right? So, a kingship sort of pseudo wealthy city state thing that was all unified. So your city, you're got your thing. Goff has got his city thing. Henry's got his city thing. I got my city thing. But when we come together, we all trade and we all work together. And this is what the ideal of the Phoenician world is. I'm not going to compare it with the United States, but you would think that in the United States, for example, the individual states. Well, Pat knows more about this than me. Pat knows, for example, the United States, that certain states have different rules than another state, and they feel that their National Guard is different from this National Guard, and they've got these rules and all the rest of it. But we come together as the United States. Is that a good interpretation, Pat, or is that completely wrong?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah, but it is too, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
So this is, in a way, this is what the Phoenicians were like, but unlike the United States, they didn't have a massive army and they didn't like going conquering everywhere. Sorry, Pat, I had to put that in there. There's a positive and a negative to what I've said. But the Phoenicians, in a way, give us the oldest form of defined governance, where there is some say that people have. It's sort of it's federation of the cities on a large scale. Working together like the United States never happened, but as sort of individual sort of cities coming pulling together to sort of defend themselves, the emphasis to call themselves Phoenicians, that's what they do, right? This is where we get the Phoenicians, this sort of the commonality, the common rules that the Phoenicians actually had, and they would take this out to the rest of the world, basically. And if we go back again to this little image, which is a lot better, Byblos itself is something that you'd find mentioned in the Bible, and it's in a way it's a commercial and religious place, and they had connections with Egypt. Byblos had connections with Egypt, and you see this sort of location within the context of the Bible, and the sense of a Phoenician is to go out. Now, at the end last night, there was a question last night that somebody asked me that I was sort of able to answer quite quickly. They said, "Well, you've talked about Roman writers and you've talked about Greek writers. What about Phoenician writers?" And there were several that we know their work survived. As you know, the Romans destroyed most Phoenician stuff. But there was also a Christopher Columbus type Phoenician called Hanno, Hano, who actually went out and circumnavigated Africa. Well, that's like over 2,000 years ago. And you get an idea that there's more that we're not really being told about history in the broadest sense. When we go to school, we're talking about the Santa Maria and the Pinta and the other boat. There was 3 of them, wasn't there? And they're and you're talking about 1492, and you're talking about the great period of exploration, and you're talking about you then go into Magellan and all these other explorers, but then you forget that the Phoenicians are at it well before anybody else. And Byblos itself is trading with ancient Egypt, when ancient Egypt has a center of power at Memphis. And we're going back to 4,600 years ago, that the Phoenicians are starting to sort of have this raison d'etre to be these great traders. So you can have, in other words, the answer to the question the other week was you can have a peaceful empire. You don't need to go out conquering and raping and pillaging and all these different things. You don't need to do it. You can have a sense of being out there. There were times that the Egyptians basically said to the Phoenicians, look, we want to rule over you, and the Phoenicians would say, all right. And then the Egyptians would lose control. And the Phoenicians were people that survived a long, long time. It's only because they were eventually gobbled up by Rome. And it wouldn't be up until about around the birth of Christ time. So you're talking about, if they're first being mentioned or thought of by the Egyptians 4,600 years ago. So the Phoenicians were out there strutting their stuff, but wait for it, 2,600 years, right? So put that into context. The British Empire lasted no more than 250 years. The Roman Empire had a big longevity. You could say that the Roman Empire, if you take it from 753 years BC, their existence, and you took it all the way through to the fall of Constantinople in 1453, that's a long time. But a lot of people have suffered in that time period, right? Where the Phoenicians are not guilty of that. They're not guilty of this sort of huge, overpowering contextual conquest. And I just wanted to put these in here because one of the great explorers that we look at next week, who circumnavigated Britain, was a Phoenician. So all of these things make sense why we're doing it this way. And it's that sort of comparison of me being able to say that there are other ways of doing things than looking at ancient Rome. I remembered of somebody online saying a few weeks ago, they said, Carl's obsessed with the romanticism of Rome. I don't think I've actually given that impression at all. What I'm trying to do is give you a worldly look of other interests and other actors that made Rome. Rome just didn't appear overnight. It appeared because there's all these actors out there. This is what the politicians say, isn't it? There's all these actors, all these other politicians. But yeah, there's all these actors out there. There's all these different things going on. But the one thing that the Phoenicians would always be having to deal with is being conquered by other people, like the Assyrians, but like being conquered by the Babylonians at one point in time, the Mesopotamians, the Persians. These were people actually survived Alexander the Great, right? Because hiya Alexander, right? Come on, just do your thing. We're still Phoenicians, And Alexander went, that type of thing. Did I give you a really interesting fact? I don't know where this came from. I think we were talking about when we were filming the other day. I don't know where. Did you know that they do think now that Alexander the Great died alive, right?
He died alive.
No, buried alive. Yeah, thank you for spotting that. Yeah, he was buried alive, right? He was put in this glass cased sarcophagi, right?
So he did die alive.
Yeah, he did die alive. Yeah, Well, okay, actually, you corrected me. Then you said I'm right, so I'm loving that. So we're both right. But he was buried alive because his heart rate was so reduced after having a concoction of alcohol that they went to him and they thought he was dead. Right? It was just a long hangover. But when he woke up, he was in a coffin.
Oh.
Mm.
So you can imagine. Oh, Alexander, he's just communicating from us from the dead. Look, I'm alive. Yeah. All right, Alexander, that's fine. You're communicating from the heavens. Apparently, he was still alive. And the reason why I mentioned that was because we were talking about Alexander the Great. Just mention that quickly. So, the Phoenicians again were able to survive because they were extremely wealthy, right? And which in a way conflicts with everything that we know about people conquering other countries, right? It said that Rome would need to conquer other countries because it needed other people's wealth to survive. Adolf Hitler made the same excuse. We need to conquer other countries because if we don't conquer other countries, the Third Reich won't survive. We won't survive. That's the same excuse Adolf Hitler made to conquer the countries that he conquered. I know some of you disagree. There's other factors in that, but if you look into it, Germany was just about to go bankrupt before it invaded Poland. So justifying war based on the fact that you need war to be wealthy is a false premise, because the Phoenicians proved that. They were extremely wealthy, but they didn't have this massive empire. And Alexander sort of pseudo conquered the area, but then the Phoenicians would bounce back. And one interesting thing is, this is really interesting, and this is odd, that Sidon on there, not Byblos, but Sidon on there, and Tyre, and another place, which is
they're in the Bible.
Yeah, they're all in the Bible. And another place on here, which isn't on here, which is called Aradus. And Aradus is actually in modern day Syria, known as Arwad. Arwad, all of these localities were allowed self-governance after the Roman Empire had conquered the area, which is really odd. The Romans treated these people like the Nabateans for a long time, right? Obviously, the Romans eventually conquered them, but the Phoenicians did survive Rome for a while, right? So this is a really interesting aspect. Yeah, really, really interesting aspect. So again, we look at these images. So what we've got is the Phoenicians had their own language. This is a stele, which is a stone carving, and what we've got is the stele itself is from the 800s. This talks about one of the kings of one of these cities, one of the Phoenician cities, and the Phoenicians were great traders in various wonderful objects. So, and they were known by everybody else. They were known by their contemporaries. They were respected by their contemporaries, because in a way they were the should I say this? In a way, they were the Jews of the day, right? So when you want to be wealthy, you look to the Jews to sort of loan money off them, and then you kill them, right? So I don't think that's the wrong analogy, but the differences with the Phoenicians is that the Phoenicians remained there, right? You didn't wipe them out. And also they did have, when you go to Cyprus, you actually hear that the Phoenicians have been here as well. The Phoenicians have got colonies in Cyprus, and they've got colonies in Anatolia, modern day Turkey. So they're a commercial power rather than a conquering power, right? And they were great craftsmen as well. They were great carvers. This is sarcophagi, a limestone sarcophagi of the king of Byblos, who was one of those rulers of this Phoenician city of Byblos before somebody else became a ruler. And the Phoenicians themselves were, in a sense, people that were starting off the modern world. Yeah, it's a strange concept. They were beginning the modern world. They were the, how do I put this? They were the Spaniards. They were the Spaniards and the Portuguese and the British of the 1500s, but they weren't going out by the sword. They were cremating, creating stepping stones with the wider world. And settlements, and creating wonders in Spain, for example, and at the same time absorbing the mineral wealth. You could sort of explore weird things like, did the Phoenicians ever try and establish a settlement in Britain? The answer is, I've got to say no, because I may as well say that I believe in King Arthur and that King Arthur's born in Glastonbury. However, I don't know that they didn't, right? Because the Phoenicians did circumnavigate Britain, right? They did circumnavigate Africa and set up colonies there. But unfortunately, these are small colonies. But as much as absorbing wealth, they would export wealth. They would export their cedar wood and their pine wood and their fine linen from Tyre and Mublos. And basically, we mentioned the murex shell last week. They actually, one thing I didn't say at the beginning, or did I? These are known as the purple people because they wore purple cloaks. They traded in Tyrian purple, Tyre purple. There's a
Oh. Hmm.
Where is he?
He's Neverland.
Lost the audio.
He's he's
He's moved into
disappeared.
another dimension.
Yeah.
Gone to another dimension. That's right.
Let's give him a phone call. Right.
Are you going to give him a phone call? You might not know.
Oh,
Hmm.
he's gone.
Hmm. Hi, Pat.
Hello, you okay?
Hi, everyone.
Hanging in there?
Oh, we had the gas man yesterday that fit in a new boiler and new
Oh,
radiators. Oh God, on a really hot day.
yeah, terrible.
Oh,
Yeah, we fitted ours 2 years ago, I guess it was, and now they're talking about all the
I'm back.
changed ones. There he
I'm
is.
not going to have one of those. We decided we're not having
Yeah.
one of those.
Okay, can you hear me? Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. All I had was where's he gone? So what was they talking about to where I was gone? Because I was in a bit of a flow.
The Phoenicians were trading and
Purple.
quite nice things.
Oh right, we got to purple. Okay, then that's fine.
Oh,
Let's go.
purple. That's
Let's get
right.
the purple. That's fine. Let's get the purple.
In the modern world.
Right. Okay. Good. You haven't missed anything. Right. So we were talking about beads and obviously we mentioned about the writing and I mentioned, amazing enough, could it have been directly the Phoenicians bringing beads to Britain in exchange for tin? And you've got to think about that. You've got to think, is that actually possible? Because we mentioned a Carthaginian coin being found in Britain, River Avon. We mentioned that last week. So yeah, the Phoenicians, why couldn't the Phoenicians have come here a long time ago, right? So what we've got is we've got embroideries, right? Which I don't know if any of you've been to Cyprus, but I have, and Henry has loads of times. But when you go to you've got them doing embroidery at little weird villages in Cyprus, and it might be that this embroidery, this sort of network of embroidery, may have actually come down from the Phoenicians. Cyprus itself has got a massive amount of salt, right, which the Phoenicians would have been trading. They would have been trading wine, metalwork, glass, glazed fions, salt, dried fish, copper, and what they would have been doing is trading other things. And I may have said something really ridiculous the other week, and somebody picked me up on YouTube, and I said it's not ridiculous, right? They may have actually been trading probably about 300, 400 years BC, silk, wait for it, that has actually come via the Silk Route. And I've mentioned this before, all the way from China. So this is a transit trade. So in other words, basically what they would do, they would use coastal huggers, right? Goff knows what they will. I'll explain them in a minute. So coastal huggers are small vessels that would hug along the coast. They wouldn't go out in deep water, right? So if they were going to come up to Britain, instead of going out into the Bay of Biscay, they would hug the coast all the way, sort of the the Pillars of Hercules out into the Atlantic Ocean, Spain, Portugal, France, Channel Islands, and then go over that way, right? They would hug it. But what they would do, they would be involved in this transit trade. And when they're involved in their transit trade, right, they're picking up lots of art forms and lots of ways to offer themselves out into the art world. And you're looking at a carving here that looks very ancient Egyptian, but it's not. It's Phoenician. And when you actually, I'm hoping that Henry will agree with me on this. When you go to the Limassol Museum, there are Egyptian-like Central American type carvings in big stelae in the Limassol Museum, and Phoenician, right? They were there, right? So even if they're not allowing us to see great cities and great other things, they're leaving their artifacts and their trading objects in these localities, like this sculpture, like this relief sculpture. These things are abundant. The difference, again, when we think about the Phoenicians and we think about their world, is that their world has survived more than the Carthaginians. The Carthaginian world was wiped out and expunged from the earth, whereas the Phoenicians continued. And the Phoenicians were respected. Being respected in Roman eyes for being cowards is a good thing. And when I say with cowards, the Phoenicians didn't have these great armies, but the Romans respected that. And the Romans allowed them to survive for a long time. So this is when we think of all of this, and again, we just go back to that sarcophagus that we had a few moments ago. Which one was it? There, that sarcophagus there, and this beautiful piece of limestone art, and you're looking at that and you're thinking, right, ancient Egyptian, you're thinking maybe Mesopotamian, you're thinking about all of this. So like the Romans, they absorbed things from other cultures. Unlike the Romans, they didn't need to take it by force, right? So this is the big difference when we're looking at this world, trying to understand this world and see this world for actually what it is. And again, looking at these beads again, we'll check these beads. I haven't got a massive amount of images, unfortunately, but ivory and wood carvings became specialities for the Phoenicians. So in other words, they're everything, right? And the Phoenicians are massive goldsmiths and silversmiths. And interesting enough, when you think about it, where did the Jewish people call their homeland? Exactly. And you start to think, well, the Jewish people and Herod and Masada and all these things, right? There's a link between the Phoenicians and the Jewish people, right? And you start to think, well, what are the Jews known for? Their metalsmithian work. What are the Jews known for? Going out, creating wealth. And that's Phoenician, right? The Jews weren't Phoenicians, but there's a big similarity there, right? And this, Pat, this is going to win you, right? One of those pub competitions, right? Glass blowing was invented by the Phoenicians. That glass, those glass bottles that you take for granted, that technology was invented by the Phoenicians over 1,100 years ago in those hot coastal areas of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos in the Levant. And that, again, is thanks to these wonderful Phoenicians. So when it says this Phoenician civilization, yeah, it's a bit more in depth than that. And one thing that we do have is an idea of how the Phoenicians dressed, what they looked like, what they wore. So we've got so much about these people, and we've mentioned the Jews again, because their language is very close to Hebrew. It's related to Hebrew, right? And obviously Hebrew, Jerusalem, Jordan, that type of area. These are sort of further Lebanon, the Phoenicians, Lebanon, and so on. And obviously Hebrew being the slave language, which the Egyptians would call it. That's very much interchangeable with the Phoenician language. So if you spoke Hebrew, you could speak Phoenician, and that's one of the things. That is one of the points that we haven't made. Although the Phoenicians are these independent people, they all spoke a universally intelligible language, this Phoenician dialect and text and trade. It was a trading language. They traded using this Phoenician. It's a bit like it's a bit like Esperanto. Except Esperanto wasn't successful. I know there's only 1 million people on the planet who can speak Esperanto. Esperanto is a language developed, I think, in Spain in the 1920s, which had British words, it had Spanish words, Italian words, Turkish words, and they made a language out of it. That was called Esperanto, right? Except whereas Esperanto really didn't survive long, and it's just a type of custom language. The Phoenician language is probably still with us in bits and pieces, right? They were able for a while, right? So if we will look at an example of their text, right? That's an example of their text, right? It started off as a cuneiform text, but then it then developed into, guess where we've got our alphabet from? You've got it, the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians gave us our alphabet. And I can blasé say that, because when you look at the developments of alphabets on the planet, so say, for example, you've got hieroglyphics. You've got loads of different characters in hieroglyphics, and you need to be a Harvard lawyer to learn it now, right? If you learn Chinese and Japanese, in the Chinese alphabet, something like 1,600 characters. I don't know, right? But where we get our modern alphabet is actually the Phoenicians, right? We get our modern alphabet from the Phoenicians. They are 22 characters, right? So, and this was probably developed in Byblos 3,500 years ago. So in other words, our language has evolved from the Phoenicians. So, and then obviously we've got to be realistic. It didn't directly evolve from the Phoenicians, because the Greeks adopted the Phoenician alphabet and the Romans adopted the Phoenician alphabet. But the Phoenicians, this very remarkable people with their artwork, their frescoes, their paintings are very distinctive. They made a big contribution to the arts and civilization. And again, it mentions Silk Route here. Silk Route definitely has got to be. I mentioned the Silk Route again, and the Silk Route is a route that stretches all the way from ancient China. 4,000 miles, 4,000-mile journey of the Silk Route to get all the way to the land of the Phoenicians. And as we're getting to the end of this little bit today, because we've got loads of other little bits of units I want to do today, so it's remarkable that I'm getting through quite a bit, hopefully. On costume, how they dressed, how they did their beards, that looks very Mesopotamian, but it's not. It's Phoenician. It's Phoenician dress, the distinctive dress. And yeah, they do have soldiers. They do have sailors, marines, and all the rest of it, because they might be attacked by pirates. So you see a couple of illustrations like that. Yes, I'm not saying they didn't have an army at all, but their army was not a conquering army. Everyone needs an army. The British army isn't a conquering army. If we went up against any foreign army today, we would be wiped out, right? Our army in Britain is like a protective army. However, that was a bit like the Phoenicians, except we go out there shouting and screaming we want to conquer countries today. But the Phoenicians were not like that. So this is one other thing. We're looking at the costumes and how they looked. Religious practice was odd, right, for the Phoenicians. So in Byblos or in Tyre, they had different gods, right? So their individual cities had different gods, right? So they had different religious practices, right? So where Balat was worshipped in Byblos, the equivalent of Milkarat was worshipped in Tyre, where Eshmun would have been worshipped in Sidon. And obviously it goes on like this. However, they may have different names for their gods and so on, but nonetheless, the beliefs and rituals shared many characteristics, which would extend their cultural connection. And, you know, and actually that pointed hat, I can remember when I was a child reading something and I was thinking, those weird Phoenicians, they got those pointed hats. And yeah, that idea of the pointed hat. And the Egyptians loved these people because when they turned up at the Egyptian court, the Egyptians knew that they weren't there to conquer. The Egyptians knew that they would just bugger off and leave what they had, and the Egyptians would give them stuff, and they'd come back the next year not to conquer, but to trade with them, right? So this again is really, really important that we understand this as something very different from what we've been seeing. You know, you always talk. We talk about warfare. It's warfare that makes the world go round, but it's not. It's clearly not, right? And actually, if I want to check Alexander the Great in the mix, you might have a little bit of a titter. Alexander the Great was a great civilizer, right? You know, he may have established 20 cities in his name, and he may have established a great empire that lasted a very short time because what happened to him at the end. However, it became a peaceful world for a little while, that the world that Alexander the Great conquered, whereas the Roman world was completely different. So there's something else weird and queer about these people. Women, right? As they get later in the Phoenician world, they start to worship more female deities, right? Maybe they're turning from a paternal world into a maternal world, right? And that's another thing. And maybe, and the reason why they're maternal is what gives them this trading gate instead of a paternal thing like Rome, which gives them a masculine gate that you've got to go out killing, raping, and pillaging, right? So this is one of those things that they at Sidon they eventually have this great god called Astarte, right? And then you start to think about the Greek female gods, and you start to go into Laeda, for example, when you look about the Greek gods and you talk about Hera and so on, and you start to think, well, actually the Greeks were conquering people, but they weren't massively conquering. The Greeks didn't conquer the whole of bloody the Italian peninsula when they could have, or so the Greeks were in the middle, right? But the Phoenicians were there on another ebb. Now, what we did was see a stone carving last week of this beautiful stone vessel that we saw carved at the base of the Acropolis, Lindos. And again, this is a carving. I think this is a panel that they recovered. That's in the Louvre. So you're talking about a Phoenician vessel, roughly about 300 years BC. But you're thinking, right? Those that study ships, right? This is not much different from coastal huggers that were still being used in the 1800s, right? And okay, I'm a great fan of Hornblower. I love it, but there's a vessel in Hornblower that it looks exactly like that, and they're trying to portray the 1800s. So you're thinking of this, no, late 1700s into the 1800s, yeah. So this is something that this is a Phoenician ship, right? It's not oared. Note, it's not oared. It's sail driven, right? And you got the prow and the aft. You got a nice stern sense of the keel rising, and the bow is out the water. It's this nice. You got a nice rudder at the back, and this is again when you. Can you see the difference in light there? You can see a lot more when you look at this one. And again, what you've got is you've got the oh god, there's a name for the sail at the front of the vessel. I had it yesterday. There's a sail on the front of the vessel on this one, and this is a specific feature that you see on later vessels as well. So what you've got the economy of them telling us what they've got, an economy of a vessel that is going to be something that's used for another. Okay, you're using this type of vessel for 4,000. Yeah, no, not 4,000 years. I nearly got that wrong. You're using this type of vessel for 2,200 years or even before that. So the Phoenicians are developing this. Maybe this is a type of vessel that's been used for 3,000 years. And as I say, we're still using them in the 1800s. And again, this is a weird thing. This is another fresco of the Phoenicians, and they've actually got they've got draft animals, and they've got wagons and carts, and they do farming as well. Again, this speaks to mind the Vikings. Yeah, this speaks to mind of the Vikings. And again, if we want to put the Vikings there and we want to put the Phoenicians there, right? The Vikings have got bad publicity. They're going out, lots of what we are told about the Vikings is wrong. They didn't go out butchering and killing people, right? The Vikings were so good that that we've got Alfred the Great defeating them, right, with a very piddly little army. And we've got whole areas where we find Vikings being butchered in different areas of Britain. Okay, so that puts themselves as not these. They may have not looted Lindisfarne, right? So in other words, there's the reason why I'm saying that is that the Vikings are the Phoenician comparison in another part of the world, right? Except the Vikings have got a bad publicity where the Phoenicians don't, and probably because the Phoenicians stick with what they are good at. Now, if the Carthaginians had gone around saying we're Phoenicians, the Phoenicians would have been wiped out. Except the Carthaginians were Phoenicians, but they decided to go off on their own as a new identifiable people. And so basically, it's like having a company, right? Oh, here's a good example. Lidl and Aldi, the two brothers, right? They form a company together, and they both go off and form a company, right? One of those is good and the other one isn't. And that's not exactly true. I'm sure Aldi and Lidl's are the same. But what I'm trying to get at is one of those is not respected, i.e. the Carthaginians, and the other one is respected, i.e. the Phoenicians, right? I seem to think that Aldi's better than Lidl's, but that's me. Let's not. There we go. Let's not be sent off the line. Yes, again, more about the Phoenicians. This is often the sort of carving reconstruction in a book from the 1800s. Again, the fish in the water, because you've got problems with perspective when people are putting these illustrations together. You chuck fish, which indicate that the boat's in water rather than using blue as a color. And basically, this is an oared vessel. You see a couple of soldiers in there, right? You see three women nagging, but then again, this is the Phoenicians. And somebody said to me last night, they said something really sensible. Andy's our sailor boy on a Tuesday, right? And Andy said last night, he said, that's not right. And I said, what's not right, Andy? Those oars, right? That's not going to work. It's going to work with the sail, but it's not going to work with the oars, right? And the reason it's not going to work with the oars is because you're not going to be able to cram them in like that, right? And you might have a man who is directing the vessel at the front, right? But maybe this is a wrong reconstruction. Maybe they're mainly sailed vessels, right? And again, maybe something like this, maybe I'm not, it is interesting, but again, it's got no sail on it, but it doesn't work. But the actual thing that does work is actually carved in the rock of a Phoenician vessel. That works. So why are the illustrations later on slightly not as it is? Because we're thinking, well, they must have had oars. You can't go in the Mediterranean with the sail. You've got to have oars, right? Which is wrong. You're not going to circumnavigate Britain or Africa with the sense of oars alone. right? Except the Spanish Armada and the English Armada of 1888, 1588, and the failed English Armada of 1589. They both had Tyrrhene oared vessels, but most of them were sails, right? And I'm glad I say that. The failed English Armada, because it was more of a balls up than a Spanish Armada a year earlier. I like winding people up. Right, we're going on to something else now. We've had enough of that. We're going on to something else, right? So what we are going to go on to is we're going to go on to part 2 today. And this is what happened to Hannibal. We've done the Punic War 3. We've done the Punic War 2. We can't do the Punic War 1 because Hannibal's dead. We've done all that. So what happened to Hannibal at the end, right? So this is what we want to know, right? Where did he go? How did things pan out? And the interesting thing is with Hannibal, right, is the end of his life, because he can't seem to get things right. And it's again, when I've compared him to the likes of, Napoleon last week, right? And basically Napoleon's really successful, and Napoleon's last massive victory is in 1813, and then after that, by the time he gets to Waterloo. But mind you, weirdly enough, I've got to be fair on Napoleon. He defeats Wellington at Quatre Bras a couple of days before Waterloo. But the point is that Napoleon loses Waterloo, and the point is that for that 100 Years' War, right, Napoleon can't get it right. He can't get things right in peacetime. He can't win battles again, and Hannibal's exactly the same, right? So after Hannibal loses against Scipio in 202 BC, and then you've got the peacetime in Carthage in 201, Hannibal is dragged back in to assist Carthage, right, in peacetime, but he's not very successful. And this isn't Hannibal. This is a guy known as Antiochus III, right? This is the king of Antioch, right? And basically, what happens is that Hannibal's hanging about Carthage, right? He's not that successful, right? And the Romans say, we want Hannibal. We want Hannibal. We want Hannibal in 195 BC. They allowed Hannibal to retire, but Hannibal couldn't stop, right? A bit like Napoleon. He wasn't happy on Elba, right? So Napoleon had to bloody come back, didn't he? So he's a bit like Napoleon. And he goes to Tyre first, Phoenician city, as we know where that is. Yeah, he goes there. They don't want him. So we don't need a general, you know. He's out wanting to general for people, right? So he goes to Antioch, right? And basically, he's honorably received by Antiochus, the king of Antioch, right? And this is the thing. So when we think about Antioch, right, it's sort of like a Greek colony. It's on the border between modern day Syria on the coast and the likes of Turkey. So you've got an idea where that is. So Antiochus III, it's great to be named after a city, isn't it? It'd be like King London the First, right? Londonus. So he went to Antiochus, and Antiochus kept him on a tight rein. And he sort of was an advisor to Antiochus. And Antiochus, there's a coin of Antiochus. It looks a very similar coin to Hannibal, but except without the beard. And Antiochus was the king of the Seleucid Empire, which again, maybe an empire that you never heard of and you might not hear of again. But this was a great empire, and this was bigger than Rome would be for a long, long time. It's actually as big, and Egypt, as big as Alexander the Great's empire would have been 130 odd years earlier, right? So what happened is that the Seleucid Empire decided, yes, yeah, there we go. The Seleucid Empire decided to fight Rome, right? And the Phoenicians were these great traders. They decided to, I know Tyre and Sidon and Byblos is actually within this Seleucid world there, but it's not actually part of the Seleucid Empire. And like the good old traders, Tyre and Sidon are, they're trading with Rome and they're trading with the Seleucids at the same time, right? And they're bringing up war materials for basically, yes, it's the Phoenicians and the great arm dealers of the time because they don't need weapons, so they're just trading with everybody. And there you go. Oh, and then Carl, didn't you say the Phoenicians were really nice people? They didn't get involved in war. They were traders, right? They were merchants, you know. But they didn't actually get involved in these fighting. So what's happening is that there we go, another different map there, and what we've got, right, is the likes of Hannibal gets together a fleet for Antiochus to fight the Romans, right? But what happens is that the Romans allied themselves with the island of Rhodes. Yeah, Rhodes has got an empire then, right? Rhodes has got an empire in 190 years BC, right? And Rhodes, with a navy alongside the Romans, right? There's this great sea battle of Eurymedon, which is otherwise known as the Battle of Side. And what happens at the Battle of Side is in August 190 BC, right? Hannibal's navy is categorically defeated, right? It's a big defeat for Hannibal, right? And again, Hannibal's also defeated in the Aegean Sea, right? So Antiochus is naturally not happy with the likes of Hannibal, right? So Hannibal, the Romans wish to sign a peace treaty with Antiochus the Great, right? Because Hannibal can't defeat them. So basically, instead of the Romans fighting Antiochus, because the Romans are not ready at this stage, right? Because Antiochus has got this sort of, big empire, right? And the Romans don't, right? And this is a land empire. The Romans are not going to be able to get an army here in time, right? So, and it's likely that Antiochus is given an offer, right? You hand over Hannibal, right? And it's peace, right? So Hannibal then fled, right? Hannibal then fled. He fled Antiochus because he thought he was going to be betrayed by Antiochus. Probably he was going to be betrayed, right? He then fled to another kingdom which you might never ever hear of again, which is the Bithynian Empire, which is there, Bithynian Empire, right? And the Bithynian Empire need a general, right? And the Bithynian Empire need a general to fight Pergamon. And guess who then allies with Pergamon? Rome. Wherever Hannibal is, Rome wants to fight him, right? So basically, interestingly enough, right, the interesting thing is Hannibal has two final victories over Pergamon, right? However, it doesn't last because the Romans are thinking, right, this is in 184 BC, right? Hannibal is at his last victories. He's got two victories over Pergamon and Rome, right? We want his balls, right, on a plate, right? If they probably did, right? And the Bithynians, right? The Romans basically said to the Bithynians, right, we'll spare the kingdom of Bithynia, right? As long as, guess what? You hand over Hannibal. And they're surrounded basically at this stage. They got a naval contingent in front of them. They're surrounded, by everybody, right? So basically, King Prusias, right, is convinced to hand over Hannibal. Hannibal can't win. The Roman writers, Appian, Pliny, Plutarch, all these Roman writers basically talk about Hannibal, right? Hannibal is said to have been poisoned by King Prusias, or Hannibal takes his own life. Officially, he's poisoned by Prusias because the Appian wants Hannibal to be this. Hannibal doesn't take his life, right? He's poisoned by King Prusias. We don't actually know the true story, right? And then what finally happens is that where is Hannibal buried, right? We actually don't know. Some say he's buried at a legendary place known as Libasea, which is in southern Turkey, right? But we don't really know that as a fact. We don't really know where that is. Just before Hannibal's death, right, you can imagine a conversation. King Prusias, right, I've got to poison you for your own good, right? Otherwise my empire is wiped out. Where do you want to be buried, right? And Hannibal was told, you can be buried in Libasea. But Hannibal thinks that he's going to be buried in Libya. So in that, Hannibal agreed to take the poison from King Prusias. But he wasn't buried in Libya. He was buried in Turkey, far away from his home. So there's lots of historians writing about this. And it's said some Roman writers are saying this. One of the Roman writers writes, let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long since experienced, since they think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death. And that's probably the words of Prusias, right? So basically, let's just get rid of him, right? You know, he's an old man, but I'm going to get rid of him, right? And then finally, Appian, again, a Roman writer that we're going to discuss next week, says, this is a final bit about Hannibal. This is quite quick, actually. Hannibal is said that, here we go, Appian wrote of a prophecy about Hannibal's death, which stated that Libasea earth shall cover Hannibal's remains. This, he wrote, made Hannibal believe that he would die in Libya, but instead it was at Bithynia Libasea that he would die. So it said that somewhere along the line, Appian, there was a historian whose words were eventually written down by Appian. This other historian had given these words to Hannibal and thought, oh, right, yeah, I'm going to be buried in Libya. So nobody can really work out where Hannibal got the idea of he was buried in Libya, but he wasn't buried in Libya, in other words. So the tomb of Hannibal must be a great tomb, but it's never, ever been found. Right. And in other, actually, we don't really know where Alexander the Great was buried. We think we know where he was, but we don't. His body was taken from where he was buried at Alexandria, and was moved to Greece. But that's another story. Right. So that's other bit of what we wanted to do tonight. Right. And the next bit, right, we want to do this, right? So this is basically rather interesting to show you all these little bits and pieces, right? So what we do have, right, is we have the finding, right, of a Carthaginian city in Italy, right? And this Carthaginian city in Italy, these were allies of Hannibal, right? And they've been looking for this city for a while now, right? And they found this city, right? And when they excavated this city, they found over 170 meters of wall. And this was actually mentioned last week. And they found 140 lead projectiles. And these lead projectiles are actually these. these are these Roman lead projectiles. So they found these when they were excavating at this city in on the lowest edge of Italy itself. So if you don't mind, folks, what I'm going to do, right? It's 8:19. I'll give you a little bit more of this after the break. But we'll have a little bit of a break now because I know Anne wants a cup of tea, right? She can't survive with a cup of tea, even though Anne was late today, which was absolutely appalling, right? I think if I mention it again, other than one of you, everybody's paid their monies for the next 2 months. So many thanks for that. But what we will do, we'll have a little bit of a break. We'll come back to this site after the break, and we'll mention a little bit more about it. And then we've got a few other things. We've got certain things being found in honey, right, which I haven't mentioned. And then we've got the architectural styles. If we miss anything out tonight, then it happens. So we've got 10 minutes, guys. So let's just get off that there and stop the sharing. As we know, Anne, sharing is caring. Anne, you're looking pretty sexy tonight with your archaeology coming top on.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Here's the back.
yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good. Right. Okay. Talking about I was going to say
sexy.
talking about breasts, right? Richard.
Yeah, really interesting. Actually, there was a piece in the paper this week about this ship that they've Phoenician ship. I think it's off the coast of Spain.
Oh, for figure's sake! Why didn't you tell me about that? It's perfect for next week. I want that for next week. Yes.
I don't know. I think I've checked the paper out.
Right, I want that for next week. That'll be perfect because when we do the circumnavigation stuff, that would be absolutely bloody brilliant. I really told Phoenician. That was off Spain, yeah.
Yeah, I think they've been.
We won't do it now, but we're doing it next week. Good, like it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Oh my God, this is all working. It's all good. It's all relevant. Right, good. Thank you for that, Richard. You've given me an orgasm now. Talking about orgasms, go.
No, got it. Waiting for the rest. Very good.
Right. By the way, Goff said that you take Patton and to see the film 28 years later.
28 years later.
Yeah, you'll love it, Anne. You'll love it. Pat, anything you want to say?
No. See if I find that article.
Right, good. You should. 10-minute break. So, Henry?
No, nothing to add.
And Anne, anything you've got to say before we no?
No.
Right, okay.
It was, but I've forgotten it.
Short break. We'll be back at 8:32. No longer. We'll be back.
All right. Okay.
We'll be back, nothing new, matron.
You win. I lose.
What do you lose?
I'm going to get a cup of coffee, I am. I'm going to break all the rules and have a cup of coffee instead of tea. I'm drinking tea all the time now. Oh, it gets boring.
There's nothing wrong with bondage anyway. Where is everyone? There's nothing wrong with bondage every way.
Oh, hello,
What?
Richard.
Yeah.
No, Richard.
Does Ray go on the Vale walks?
Oh, sorry.
But Ray,
Ray.
Ray.
no.
Oh, I don't know.
I know a son, Ray.
No, I don't know a Ray.
Oh,
Ray? I don't know a Ray either.
you used to do like the crossways. Was it you met at crossways or something?
Did he used to go to Crossways Church? What?
No, he's one of my neighbours. But he used
Oh.
to go on the walks, you know.
I don't know what the hell you're on about, but that's life.
Oh,
What?
I can't remember his surname now.
Why didn't you just say something random like anything?
Eric.
Right. No. Oh. Look, I don't care about. Look, Eric's not part of my life. I don't care about him. Right. Okay. Let's crack on. Anne, we're cracking on. Right. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. All right.
Anne. Look, we've all got special needs, right? But more of us than most. You know, look at Goff. He's an archetypal alpha male.
Oh.
Because Goff used to be in a merchant navy. He was very butch once. Right. So anyway, look. Yes, we're back to it. I don't know what time it is. It's blooming hell, it's 8:36. How is it 10 minutes turns into 14 minutes? I don't know. It's ridiculous. Right. Anyway, so what we're going to do now? We were mentioning Ugento, which is a city which they've found was allied with Hannibal and Carthage in the Second Punic War. Now, I think the point that we did make when we did the Carthaginians was that
Is that an arrowhead?
yes, it's a ballista bolt. They found 9 of these. Now the point is, 450 of the slinger lead shots, but bullets they call them. But the point is with this, one of the points we didn't make is that there were lots of areas of Italy that were already anti-Roman before the Carthaginians ever got there. So that's the whole point. Now, and Ugento was one of those cities. So this was actually an ally of Rome. And apparently, eventually, before the Romans besieged this city, right, they managed to get the walls an amazing 20-foot thick, right? But the Romans were still able to penetrate these walls in the latter part of the Second Punic War, where they were allied with the Carthaginians. Now, they've been trying to look at this and excavate this, and these things were actually flung at the walls by machines that I showed everybody last night, which I'm going to show you now, which I didn't put in the images. And we will just basically show you these, not eBay. We'll show you Scorpio. Are they Scorpion or Scorpio? Oh, they were Scorpio machines. They're basically a bit like a massive. Oh, that's it. Scorpio. Oh my God, what am I looking at? No, that's not right. Scorpio machines. No, that's wrong. Oh, for God's sake, I was on a dating site then. Right, okay. Oh. Right, Roman. If I put in Roman, you've got to be really careful when you're doing this. Roman Scorpio machines. Right, okay. Right, bingo. Right, come on, show me an image. Right, there we go. That's basically a Roman Scorpio machine. So Roman artillery. So basically, these winder things, which are on the closer to the screen, that would wind up, and it would pull the rope further on down, and you would launch projectiles in the Scorpio machine, but more like these. So this is the type of one that would actually have those bolts that you've seen that they've excavated 9. And what these would be launched at the wall, and then there would be a hefty rope on the ends of some of these, and they would yank at these, and because they were fastened fast into the beds and the wall, they would yank at these, and bit by bit, bits of the wall would come down. And this is what these are. This is called a Scorpio machine. So what we then got is, so if we go back to the images, that's what that is. So they found 9 of these, and they excavated 170 meters of this defensive wall that was they tried to stand up against the might of Rome. And this was a city, Ugento, which was actually a city of the Messapian people, right? And there you go. So allied with Rome. So what we're going to do, we're going to go on to something else now. Oh, there we go. That was the front facing of the wall. You can see, but the wall was gradually dismantled because they weren't allowed to have a wall anymore, because the Romans didn't want the people of Ugento to actually rebel anymore. So the people of Ugento, the wall, most of it was demolished. So there you go. 170 meters of it. Well, that's only part of the 170 meters of it. And there are 450 of these lead projectiles that were actually found, and that's centimeters there. So that's just under 5 centimeters in length. So you can imagine, you get hit by one of these at speed, you're dead. And there it is, one of the arrowheads. You could tell by that. It's actually quite a long arrowhead. This is wouldn't have been mounted on a wooden shaft or anything. Well, it would have been mounted on one shaft in one of the machines, but you wouldn't actually wander around with one of these chucking them at people, because they'd be very, very hefty. So this is with the point on it, and this was half the length of a ruler, a piece of this iron. So finding 9 of these, and there's Ugento on the map. So what I wanted to do next was I wanted to draw attention to something that will become something that we will talk about, which known as the 5 classical orders of the classical world. Now, when we look at architectural styles, and when we look at Roman Britain, we'll notice that the main architectural style the Romans introduced were the Corinthian and the composite, right? But when we go around when we look at something like the Parthenon in Athens, the main style used at the Parthenon in Athens, roughly about 450 years BC, is this Doric style with the entablature, which is along the top, which is basically some of the stuff that the Lord Elgin took away in 1801. Now, the Tuscan style there, the one on this side, is Tuscany, Etruscans. That's the style that the Romans would use first, right? Now, that style itself is a style that you see on burial furniture in regards to Etruscan tombs underground. It's said that most of these styles here, Tuscan, Doric, and Ionic, are styles that originally started off in wooden. This was a wooden form that they started off with. But then they, from the Tuscan style to the Doric and Ionic style, those styles from the Doric Ionic, they actually started to flute, right? Put the fluting down it. But one of the things that me and our wonderful Henry will be familiar with is the Tuscan style, because when we go down in these are the ones that are usually used for burial furniture underground. When we look at the Tomb of the Kings and the Tomb of the Queens in Cyprus, in Paphos, this Tuscan style is the ones that you see in the peristyle rock cut tombs underground. So you see Tuscan style. So this was used, the Tuscan style is the one used all the way through, right? Because it's simple style. But the Doric and Ionic style are the ones mainly around the Mediterranean. But the Romans introduced into Britain the Corinthian and the composite styles of carving. So obviously we'll come across these and we'll get an idea. So the Tuscan, the Doric and Ionic styles are usually, and you'll shout at me and say that's not exactly true, but the Tuscan, Doric and Ionic styles are usually for smaller squat temples, right? But the Parthenon isn't a small squat temple like the ones it's the island of Sicily. But the island of Sicily usually has Ionic styles, and those are the ones, the temples that you actually see in films like Clash of the Titans and so on, right? So that's where they filmed it. So so there you go. So, but if you're going to have really tall sort of Corinthian columns, right? Those types of columns you can actually see in entranceways like the Pantheon, not the Parthenon, the Parthenon is in Athens, the Pantheon in Rome. So the Corinthian styles, that's the one you actually see for really tall columns, slender columns, usually the ones that you actually see in marble. So the reason why I wanted to do this today was to sort of give you a take on architectural styles, which is obviously different from the architectural styles that we see in regards to the Carthaginians. And then we're moving away from when we're talking about the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians are naturally not building all these wonderful temples and stuff because they don't really need to, because they're not great civilization builders. As we know, the great trading, the commercial powers, they would have probably used all of these, but in their own sort of styles, they're leaving that for the likes of the Greeks and the likes of the Romans eventually to sort of bear out the Doric and Ionic and the Corinthian and then the composite. Now, one last thing to the Corinthian is that you've got this usually base arrangement with the Corinthian, composite and Ionic. Quickly, Tuscan, Doric, these are sort of, you can get flat columns in this rather than circular columns, but mainly circular columns. And the Doric and Tuscan, more like the Doric, takes their sort of influential styles from the Mesopotamians and ancient Egyptians, where the Corinthian rips its styles off from the Ionic and Doric. And then again, when we're thinking about the Corinthian, sorry to talk fast in this, but trying to get through a lot today. We've got the canthus sleeve. The canthus sleeve usually used in the top part of the columns here. And occasionally what you might see in Roman Britain, you might see these bits of broken off, really weathered columns, tops of these capitals. You might find bits of these in marble or Bath stone or something like that, Portland stone, in archaeological context in Britain, but it's really unlikely that you're going to see the likes of Doric and Ionic in Britain. And I just mentioned this as well. This was an opt-out clause. I could have done more about columns. I could have spent whole half an hour on it, made it really interesting. Hopefully it sounds interesting anyway. But I gave this an open thing. If any of you said, "Oh, I want to do a little bit more about this architectural stuff and see the wonderful art involved with what these things, the entablatures at the top, and actually what these columns are actually supporting," and if one of you says, "Oh, I actually want to do a little bit more of that," we will. But nobody did yesterday, so it's up to you guys. But however, both the Doric and Ionic order appears to have originated in wood. Mentioned that. And the Temple of Hera, the Greek god in Olympia, goddess, there we go, is the oldest well-preserved temple of Doric architecture. However, that's in stone. Built in 600 years BC. So giving you an idea of Doric and Ionic. And one thing I would say is chucking another little bit of a snake in the mix, is that the Greeks had a dark age, right? It's a period of Greek civilization roughly between about 1,000 years BC and roughly 650, 700 years BC. We don't really know what happened in Greece, and suddenly everything's happening, right? And why that is, we don't know, but it's what's happening. 1 minute, Greece is a backwater, like Rome once was, and like Londinium once was, and then suddenly you've got all this stuff happening, right? Like Stonehenge. Stonehenge came from nowhere, didn't it? So there we go, thousands of years ago. So Doric order later spread across Greek lands. Sicily brought with sort of Greek architects, and Doric order, Ionic orders, these things sort of remain. But what we've got is that the Corinthian style is sort of coming up in its essence because of Rome. It's basically mentioned the Greek were no doubt aware of the use of stone columns. There we go, for Egyptian architecture and Eastern architecture. That's where this sort of comes from. And obviously these styles and sort of the expression of Greece is then superseded by the expression of Rome. And the Roman wanted to do something better, but nicking all their sort of stuff from other people. Now, I want to get to the end bit, and I want to have enough time to do our end slides, because there's something really powerful that we say about the Carthaginians and Roman mythology, right? So if you guys give me just 30 minutes, we'll be finished by 9:20. If any of you got to leave earlier, I'm sorry. But what we will do, we've got two other things I want to do after this. Actually, slight three, but two other things I want to do after this. I want to look at the ancient Roman foundation myth, 753 years BC, Aberbe Continental. I want to do that, and I want to do something to do with Carthage, and something else to do with Carthage, which I might do directly after this. So this itself is what they've done is that they've found in Spain, right? They've been excavating archaeological remains in Spain, right? And this is known as Cartagena, right? And Cartagena, which is in Spain. And the point is that we've got better remains of the Carthaginians in Spain than in North Africa, because the Romans had more of a kick in destroying anything to do with the Carthaginians in North Africa. We mentioned this last week, but there was not much in the remains, much left in them. In the sense of remains, but we do have little bits of wall that have been excavated in Spain, defensive structures. This is what the Spanish are so proud of, this little bit of archaeology, right? That they've dedicated a museum associated in Cartagena, associated with the Carthaginians. They're really proud of this. And I know the Spanish are actually pretty good with their archaeology, better than the Brits, to be honest with you. They've got really good preservation strategies, unlike the Brits. And I've worked there, so I know they do things. However, so what they've got, they've erected a whole museum over this, where you've got bits of wall and stuff that you can actually go in there with. Behind this glass, you can see bits of wall. It's great, isn't it? You don't see anything like this in Britain. And what we've got is that lots of the Carthaginian remains in Spain are usually dating from about somewhere in about 220, 230 years BC, when the Carthaginians had taken over Spain, only to give it up to the Romans. And there's a few other places in Spain, a few other names, like interesting enough, Ibiza. That's the holiday resort. There's Arthur Carthaginian remains there, so that's absolutely great. And so what we've got another place in Spain known as Carmona. If any of you have ever heard of these places, which has a little bit of the sense of Phoenician remains there. And another place called Cartea. None of these places I really know where they are, but we've got bits of a Carthaginian city gate at Cartea. They do exist. And La Villa Juasa in the likes of Spain as well. So now we're gonna do the next one. Before we do this, right? Does anyone know what this is? We're not going to do it yet, and then we're going to do this. So what we're going to do, we're going to have this image there, right? Because there's no way of illustrating this, and I've got where is it now? Hang on a minute. Have I cut this out? All right. I've actually cut this off the internet, right? So I'll read this out to you all. All right. About 10 years ago, I was on an archaeological excavation in northern Israel, where we uncovered two sealed earthenware jars full of pre-Hellenistic honey, which was probably Carthaginian, which places it quite nice. My excavation leader told us the same thing, and then offered us the opportunity to taste it, i.e., a sealed container at this site, and there was like a honey material in it, right? So there we go. Only a few people dared, me being one. It tasted like honey. We then sent the jars off to be examined. Back in the United States, we were in a lab with most of the people who were on the excavation, and the results of the test came back in. My my excavation leader, read the opening few lines and then slowed. He said somberly, Your good old days. Now, some of you took me up. Oh, I can't do an American accent. Sorry. Now, some of you took me up on my offer to try the honey. If you are one of those people, I offer you now the chance to leave the room. No one moved. Oh, fiddly-dee. You asked for it. In the bottom of the jar of honey, there remained the blanched bones of an infant child, he said. What maybe I should have told you back when you tasted it 2 years ago is that often pre-Hellenistic cultures would offer their stillborn children to the sun god in earthenware jars of honey. It seems over the last 2,000 years, all but the bones have disintegrated and been absorbed by the honey itself. So the person tasting that honey was tasting human remains. Right. So what we've got now, okay, is I would like to go back to here, right? And this is actually a good lead into this, right? So this is actually what got me into looking at this. And there's a lot of criticism of the Carthaginians. And this is the criticism. Did the Carthaginians and Phoenicians actually sacrifice their infants to the gods, or is it a myth? Now, in 2012, there was a press article printed dismissing the fact that the Carthaginians and Phoenicians sacrificed their children. In 2014, there was another press article, which I can remember cutting out and reading in the class then. And I'm sure I must have read this in the likes of the Bridgend and Lancet Major classes. I read this out, and it basically goes as follows. Now, I'm going to read this out. I don't hold with it, but there you go. So, the Carthaginians sacrificed own children. Graves holding tiny cremated bones confirm accounts dismissed as Greek or Roman black propaganda. It might still be. However, there's two sides to this story. Just as ancient Greek and Roman propagandists insisted, Carthaginians and the Phoenicians, but we'll keep on the Carthaginians. So basically, that one that we've just mentioned in northern Israel, that was probably a Carthaginian one, but it may have been a Phoenician one. But by putting a baby in a stillborn baby in a vat of honey, that's hardly terrible. That's probably a good thing to do. But this is a completely different story. So the Carthaginians, it said, did kill their own infant children, burying them with sacrificed animals and ritual inscriptions in special cemeteries to give thanks for favors from the gods, according to a new study. This is something dismissed as black propaganda because in modern times, people just didn't want to believe it, said Josephine Quinn at Oxford, who was behind the study. But when you pull together all the evidence, archaeological, epigraphic writing on stone and literary written in documents, it is overwhelming and we believe conclusive they did kill their children. And on the evidence of the inscriptions, not just as an offering for future favors, but fulfilling a promise that had already been made. Now, we've got to be very careful with this because there are only no more than about three or maybe four Carthaginian historians that I can actually come across. The Carthaginians weren't able to write their own history. So we've got to be very careful when we hear this because it might still be black propaganda, because I've got another take on this, a third take. So this here is a specific place that these bones would actually be buried, right? And the information is really, really interesting, right? But when I started looking into this, I got into my own experiences with all of this, and my own experiences are, looking after sheep and burying, lambs that I've managed to bring into this life, and then suddenly they die. It's really terrible to experience. And being somebody that's experienced a child that's actually died, you go through all these processes of mourning and burying. And so I'm putting my own take on this as well. But back to the story. This was not a common event, and it must have been among an elite. They always talk about the elite, right? Because cremation was very expensive. So they would cremate the remains of the child. And so was the ritual of burial. There's a tomb there in a specific building called a Tophet, right? Topet, or Tophets, the Tophets, where they used to bury them. Not many of these survived because the Romans just destroyed them. It may even have been seen as a philanthropic act for the good of the whole community, right? So this is an argument within two schools of thought, one that don't believe it, one that do, and one's like me, that are in the middle. Right, we'll do my middle bit at the end. So argument is raised on the subject since cemeteries known as Tophets, only for children burials, after the biblical account of a place of sacrifice. This is actually apparently talked about in the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Leviticus, that talks about Moloch, which is a process of sacrifice. The Moloch, a process of sacrifice, which is mentioned in the book of Leviticus. So again, this is raised over these cemeteries of Tophets, the biblical account, place of sacrifice. So they've been excavating these since the 1900s on the outskirts of Carthage in modern Tunisia, and then at other Carthaginian sites in Sicily and Sardinia. So naturally, the Carthaginians can't talk up for themselves because they were wiped out by the Romans, right? Now, before we go on, right, I want to say something, right? Again, defending myself, I'm not a massive fan of the Romans. It might turn that way. I know a lot about the Romans. I've studied, I've written books about the Romans. But one thing I would say about the Romans, right, is some Roman practice was downright something evil, right? And what we have found in British context is exposure pits, where the Romans would, if you wanted a boy, right, and you didn't want a girl, you would take the girl to an exposure pit. This is in Roman era Britain, Roman era Empire, right? You take the girl to an exposure pit. You would just leave her there, right? Because the child wasn't wanted, right? And the child would scream and cry, and hopefully would be eaten by a fox or a wolf, sometimes taken away by a family that actually wanted the child, right? And the Romans did that. The Romans didn't accept that girls had rights until the age of 7. The Romans were right bastards, right? Some Romans were really horrible people. Not all Romans. I'm sure some Roman era people were really, really nice, and lots of them would have been, right, and really cared for their family. We've got lots of accounts about this, but some were downright evil, right? And then this links us in with the foundation myth of ancient Rome, right, where Romulus and Remus were actually exposed, right, and they were eventually gathered together by a shepherd. We tell that story hopefully by the end. So talking about all of this, and we found a burial ground in Britain where there's a ditch, right, and there's all these remains of little children, right, babies, right. And you're thinking, hang on a minute, what's going on here? The Romans obviously cared enough to actually put their children bury them, and they're dumped in there, right? And they found out the building behind is a brothel, and mothers just take and is that good? This is the Romans doing this, right? Is actually sacrificing a child where you put it out of its misery straight away. Is that's better than just allowing a child to scream and suffer, right? That's better than what the Romans did. But there you go. Anyway, back to the story. So the graves held tiny cremated remains, right? And there's inscriptions associated with these, a Carthaginian inscription, or two. So the graves held tiny cremated bones carefully packed into urns, buried under tombstones, giving thanks to the gods, right? one has a carving which has been interpreted as a priest carrying the body of a small child, right? This is another form of inscription. Some archaeologists and historians saw the finds as proving ancient accounts of child sacrifice. Others insisted they showed tender respect for cherished children who died before or soon after birth, or a child that you knew wasn't going to live long. And if any of you go to see the film, the 28 years later, right, it links in with that. I'm not saying anymore because it'll spoil it. But Ralph Fiennes is doing that scene. So the professor from Oxford and her colleagues, the ones that say that the Carthaginians were like bastards, probably Roman lovers, she says that the inscriptions are unequivocal. The evidence is unequivocal. Time and again, we find the explanation that the gods hear my voice and bless me. It cannot be that so many children conveniently happen to die at just the right time to become an offering. Well, what if you kept a child that died for a while until you needed to make that offering of a child to the gods, right? That makes sense, but maybe she doesn't agree. And in any case, a poorly or dead child would make a pretty feeble offering if you're already worried about the gods rejecting it. Hang on a minute. There's so many cultures on the planet, including the Vikings. If you've got a feeble child, a child that's born in a special way with impurities in their soul, that is a good thing that you offer the gods, right, when the child dies. So I'm going to argue with this. It's really angry that they're portraying these Carthaginians as being these people that did this, right? This is my take, not her take. Then there is the fact that the animals from the sites, which were beyond question sacrificial offerings, are buried in exactly the same way, sometimes in the same urns with the bones of the children. So it's okay to sacrifice animals, but it's not okay to sacrifice human remains. Is that what we're saying? Fine. You're obviously a meat eater. Although hundreds of remains were found, hang on a minute, there were far too few to represent all the stillbirths and infant deaths of Carthage. According to this Oxford specialist, there were perhaps 25 such burials a year for a city of perhaps half that million people. So therefore, she's shooting herself in the foot, really, right? Isn't she? Anyway, so the Roman historian Dodorius, who we'll talk about next week, and other ancient historians, we haven't mentioned Dodorius at all up until now, ancient historians gave graphic accounts of Carthaginian child sacrifice, but the Romans didn't talk about their own crap. There was in their city a bronze image of Kronos, extending his hands, palms up and sloping towards the ground, so that each of the children, when placed thereon, rolled down and fell into a sort of gaping pit filled with fire, right? Apparently, the Egyptian pharaoh, the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, did this. There we go. Dodorius even said that some citizens who bought children from poor people and reared them especially for sacrifice believed misfortunes had resulted because they had not sacrificed their own offspring. Really? This is a passionate argument. As you can see, I'm passionate about this. With scientists coming up one way or another, opposing conclusions about bone fragments. So the Oxford Don, it published an antiquity in 2014, 11 years ago, published this paper saying that there's overwhelming number who died before were murdered in infancy. Murdered, that's a strong word. The feeling that some ultimate taboo is being broken is very strong. It was striking how often colleagues, when they asked what I was working on, reacted in horror and said, "Oh no, that's simply not possible. You must have got it wrong." And there we go. We'll write from our own words, then we'll do a response, and then we'll do the last bit. We've got 10 minutes then to do my last bit. We like to think that we're quite close to the ancient world, what they were really just like us. The truth is, I'm afraid that they really weren't. Really, I don't think that that's a good statement at all. My own take on this is that this is quite a small sample that's dying every year, and we don't really know what's going on. So what they're saying is that no children died in infancy, right? They were sacrificed, right? They were killed, right? No children naturally died in infancy, right? So therefore, every single child that we see cremated in one of these burial grounds happens to be somebody that was actually murdered and sacrificed to appease a god. And I'm saying that's absolute coddle pip, right? There's such a small selection, and okay, let's talk about reality. If you've got a child who's so deformed and so in such a bad state, is it a bad thing for this child to be sacrificed when they don't have the medical assistance that we've got today? Is that such a bad thing? Let's not have that debate. But the fact of the matter is, this is quite a slight on the Carthaginians. And let's talk about the next bit. Anne, you want to say something?
Oh,
No?
yeah. You know, the value of children has changed a lot. And, you know, the Romans didn't really rate a person until they were over 12 years old. They weren't even a person, you
No,
know.
exactly.
Children weren't valid, you know, viable, or valid. So I think there's always been a sort of feeling that they weren't that worth, you know.
Exactly.
Although having said that, I mean, they must have been worth something to sacrifice. You know.
Oh, you've gone that way. You're completely correct. So hang on a minute. Yeah, exactly. This is exactly my point.
Yeah.
You're validating the child by sacrificing it. So this child is important to sacrifice it in the first place. So yeah, we've just come all the way there. So what I want to do is I want to mention the fact that we've got this last bit today. And we've got this. It's the we will finish at 20 past. So this is the legend of Romulus and Remus, this big legend. Romulus and Remus, in the year 753 years BC, two brothers. They grew up. Romulus killed his brother. By the way, the last Roman emperor in 476 AD 476 was actually called Romulus. The original leader of Rome was Romulus. The end leader, the irony of it, was called Romulus. Romulus killed his brother and established the city on Palatine Hill. There is the Palatine Hill, there. Palatine Hill. And his brother was obviously on the Aventine Hill. And obviously you've got the 7 hills of Rome. By 600 years BC, the 7 hills had unified into a single town, apparently with all the way around it. Not really sure about that, nor really believe it. But what you've got the River Tiber, and let's just do the legend here. But the legend has been painted into the nature of something that is probably completely made up. But what we want to do is we want to get my little notes out here, and I want to talk about this and tell you the little bit of mythology. Now you've all come across versions of the mythology of Romulus and Remus, and in many ways the legend associated with Romulus and Remus is the idea of the foundation of Rome. And when we talk about the foundation of Rome, it's celebrated in the Roman world, and the Roman world as being ab urbe condita, right? So the foundation of Rome, ab urbe condita, in the year 753 years BC. Now, what we're going to do, I'm going to really simplify the story, but somewhere along the river Tiber, right, there were 2 boys, right, and the 2 boys being eventually called Romulus and Remus. Now, Romulus and Remus's uncle didn't want Romulus and Remus to live. And Romulus and Remus's uncle had the two children placed on the bank of the river Tiber. Some say that Romulus and Remus were then taken to a cave by a wolf. And there we go. We've got to have that image, haven't we? We can't not have that. And that's why we have the Capitoline wolf, sculpture of the she-wolf feeding the twins Romulus and Remus, the most famous image associated with the founding of Rome, according to Livy. Apparently, this is an original bronze created. There you go. Livy says, this Roman historian, this was apparently created in the year 296 BC, but other people think it's a complete failure. Complete failure, complete fake, right? So anyway, back to the story. So what happens in popular folklore is that, yeah, there we go. Let's get the plan. Okay. In popular folklore is that a shepherd then found Romulus and Remus being suckled by a wolf, right? And then apparently the shepherd takes the two children home, Romulus and Remus, and it's the shepherd and his wife that look after the children. So it's really simple. As the boys develop, they split up. They have a bit of a falling out. So Romulus and Remus sets up his little group of people on the Palatine Hill, and Remus sets up his little group of people on the Avetine Hill. Right? There's a lot in this story. This is why I'm simplifying it. Right? So, and apparently there's loads of other people living on these other hills, the 7 hills of Rome. And the Servian walls were obviously set up roughly after the people of Gaul destroyed Rome, and after the 300s, this wall around these 7 sort of hillocks was established. But anyway, go back to the story. So they were born in 700. So the story is: are we talking about when the boys were born? Were they born in 750 years BC? Or was this the moment that Romulus and Remus set up Rome on the Palatine Hill in 753 years BC? It's open to interpretation. Anyway, back to the story. So basically, as boys do, right? Romulus had a little bit of a fight with his brother Remus and killed his brother Remus, right? Or Remus had an accident at the hand of Romulus, and so Romulus killed his brother Remus. Now the next bit is key, right? Romulus decided to send a messenger out from his place on the Palatine Hill. Now he was in charge of the Avetine Hill. He sent a messenger out and he basically said, I want all people who are ex-slave, all criminals, all rapists, all murderers, right? I want them all to join me. And what we'll do, we'll take over these 7 hills, right? And the Romans are proud of this story, right? It's not a story to be proud of. Well, a brother kills another brother. They get all these rapists and murderers in to create this city, right? And Roman historians like Livy and so on are writing about this. They're really proud of this. And then what happens, right, is that let's show another little bit of an image here. Then what happens is that there's a kingdom nearby called the Kingdom of the Sabine, kingdom of the Sabine people, right? And it's got a king, right? And Romulus and his gang of rapists and murderers, yes, that's what the historians say, decide to attack the Sabine people, right?
Sabine women.
Yeah, and they want the Sabine women, exactly, right?
Yeah.
The Sabine women, you know the bit of the story. So Romulus decides that he wants the Sabine women. And then basically the king of the Sabines say, basically, no, we don't want to give our women to a load of murderers and rapists, right? But what happens in a typical Roman way, Romulus talks over the Sabine king and they decide to get a unity together. And the Romulus ends up with a load of Sabine women, right? And then basically this is the start of the Roman dream and the Roman vision. And then you can tell quite quickly this is how Roman society developed. They developed on a patriarchal form, dominated by men, dominated by a sense of warfare, dominated by outcasts. This is dominated by outcasts. The outcasts come together, right, to create Rome, right? And then you get a link with the Roman ideology. And strangely enough, who comes up in Capua, with the great Spartacus rebellion in 75 BC? Capua, Spartacus is a slave, right? And rebels against an established state that was founded by slavery. And think about the hypocrisy that Rome is founded upon, with the foundation of their city of Rome, which is 753 years BC. And that is the foundation of the Roman state that gives birth to this ideology and a sense of Rome that goes on until the collapse and capture of Constantinople in late April in the year 1453 AD by Mehmed the Great. And in many ways, it's a good thing that Mehmed the Great exterminated the idea of Rome forever, but it didn't, because the idea of Rome is currently enshrined in the systems and governance of the greatest power on the planet today, America. Senators represent the House of Representatives, the Senate. It's there today still, right? The Americans based their system on the idea of ancient Rome. So on that moment, it's 9:21. I said I would finish now, so let's see if there's any questions. And hopefully we got so much in that tonight. I'm glad we've actually managed to get through all that. Obviously Richard had to leave earlier, but that's life. So okay then. I've got to do some work for Richard after this. I've got to do more of our wonderful book on Barry and Cadoxton. So let's do Annie and Henry. Anne, anything you want to
I was going to say, it was founded on a corrupt sort of, corruption and or whatever bad things happened, and I think it's a good job Jesus came along.
Yes,
when he did. I mean, it was needed at the time, I suppose.
or was it because the Phoenicians didn't need to do this, and nor did the Etruscans? So
no.
That's my counter argument always.
Were they around the same time?
The Etruscans were around the same time, and they doing their own thing. They were just chilling,
They were obviously a very much a native people. Well, I say native. They seem very refined, really.
The Etruscans did their own thing, So
and the Phoenicians and the Carthaginians and all that. I mean, they're just there's more positivity came out of this evening about these smaller groups than like Rome, really. Yeah, but it's very scary to think that America's based on Roman, politics.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
I'm glad the American army is a little bit more civilized than the Roman army. Just put it that way. Right. Okay then. Henry, anything you want to say, and then Pat, and then Goff, and we'll finish. Go on, Henry.
Just very quickly on your child death scenario, there doesn't seem to be much consideration of disease, famine.
No.
All of those things, and the complexity of giving birth, which has a high attrition rate.
Yes.
Yeah.
You are completely correct. I Henry, if you finished there, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
You don't mind me saying it as it is. If my wife died and the baby died, right? The best way to appease the gods would be to cremate the child, because I've lost two massively important things in my life, right? I would sacrifice that child. That's surely the right thing to do. Yeah, the
Yeah.
child is dead. The child died anyway. But what I'm trying to say, what's wrong with any of that, right? And so then, what the Roman historians have done, they've taken it further. That's wrong, you obviously sacrificed the child when it was alive. And I'm just thinking, no, you've got to look into what you've just said and what I've said, in these examples, and you're dead right, Henry. So anyway, thanks, Henry.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Pat. We can't hear you, Pat. No speaker on. I'm gonna put my goat to bed. Go on, Pat.
You put me to bed. Right. It's just a little thing. Let's
Go
see. Oh yeah, you can see it.
Oh, you can see it. What is that?
It's a crystal jar. There's a person.
Love it. You can see it clearly. Yeah, I'm loving it. Your camera's really good. Yeah, keep it up there. Go and tell us what it is.
So it's was found in Scotland.
Yeah.
Along with 100 other relics.
Yeah.
Southwest Scotland, and it's called a Viking era rock crystal jar.
Oh,
Nice.
So yeah, really pretty. And I guess that's all gold, that stuff there.
Yeah. That's a really nice. Yeah, that's clear. It's so clear on there. That's really clear.
Gorgeous.
Cool.
Really pretty.
And that was reported today, was it? It's obviously the Viking period.
In the newspaper, it was June 21st. Yeah.
all right. Okay.
And where did it say in Scotland that was? So we get an idea of.
Yeah, we've got it. Kirk, C-U-D, and then Bright.
Kirkbride.
Kirkbride.
Yeah,
Oh, right.
And it's Southwest Scotland, and they will be displayed there later this year.
Oh, nice. Sounds
100
good.
items. 100 items.
Is it Kilbride or Kirkbride?
Kirkbride.
Kirk, and then C-U-D, and then Bright.
Kirkbride. Kirkbride's a different place now. And again, right? They probably said it's a hoard and it's been buried for people to go back. Why does it need to be that? We keep getting so many of these things now. And we've got to look at these more objectively. Anyway, thanks for that, pal. That was really good. Thank you. So, okay then, Goff, anything you'd like to leave with us, and then we'll call it a night.
Well, just go back to the lecture. I mean, it's the old cliche, isn't it? Nothing's changed at all. It's
No.
Well.
No, and the point is, if we don't learn from the past, we repeat those mistakes, and we just keep making those mistakes over and over again.
Exactly. Anyway, thank you for that lecture. It's very good.
Well, yeah.
I really appreciate that, you saying that, Goff, and thank you very much, Goff. And go and get to see the film 28 Days. It's not as you think it's advertised, Goff.
Okay, I'll see if it's on in the Odeon. Yeah. Good.
Okay. Anyone want to say anything else before we finish? No? Okay then.
28 days.
Later. Years. Okay then. Anyway, thank you very much, Goff.
Bye.
And Henry and Richard, who's gone, and anyone else who knows me online. Thank you very much. Nostar.
Good night. Have a good week.
Time, I don't know when.
What?
Henry will take you to see 28 years. He'll love that. Hey, do you know what? Right?
I'm going now.
Because I've got a discount card, right? It only cost me £6 for two people to go in, but then we spent 15 quid on popcorn, and it was really worth it.
Share it back.
And there was a lot of blood.
In the popcorn, yeah.
Have a good week.
No, Henry, thanks for joining us.
Henry. Bye.
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 Have to go and meet Henry in Cyprus with me, maybe. Anyway, thanks for watching online, and don't forget to join my channel. And I've got to the day that a long journey back home tonight, and well, when I say long journey, it takes me an hour and 40 minutes to go home. Yeah. What day is it? So interesting about an acting job that I've got maybe coming up. Ooh, that's really good. And yeah. Yeah. Do you know what I might do? I might do a little bit of a live later on. Okay, I might do a little bit of a live, get the light in you, it's a bit more clearer and stuff. So yeah, I just I'm just gonna see. I'm just sort of um culling the cud, as it were, right? And there we go. Look at that. Let's see that. I wonder how my face looks. I don't like that. Oh, hang on. How was that? How does that sound like that? I can see how that works. I could do a live tonight. Can I just sort of do a little bit of a live? I don't know. Why would I want to do a live? Why do I need to do a live? I don't know. Maybe might do a live for 10 minutes tonight. Just see who's on. Just like that. Uh, yeah. Light's not really working, is it, on there? Never mind. Right. Anyway, I have something to eat now. Yes. Anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's look at the chat box. Back to the other technology tomorrow and next week. Let's just see what I've got on here. And yeah, and I wonder if Mandy's watching. All my love about Devrig, Mandy, and yes, if you do watch this, Mandy, my thoughts are with you always. So I'm just going to see if there's anything in the chat box. I know, Devrig, you're looking after Mandy. I know you are. So nothing in the chat 1, nothing in the chat 2, nothing in the chat 3, nothing in the chat 4, 5 in that chat, 6, 7, nothing in that chat 8, 9, 10. Let's get the goat to bed before